Welcome to my review of the Darksword Armory Arming Sword. I should tell you just a couple of things to start with. I'm not an employee of Darksword Armory, nor have I been compensated in any way to do this review. As a matter of fact, I'm not a sword expert, nor I'm even historian. I'm just a tremendous sword enthusiast. Just a couple of things about the arming sword in general. This sword is also known as the knight's or knightly sword. It was very popular during the 13th hundreds, the 1400s, and the 1500s. And Oakeshott actually says that this was the most widely used sword from about 1300 through to about 1510. It is a sword that really developed for two main reasons, and it was the evolution of swords at the time. The first thing has to do with armor. The development of plate armor made a significant difference in the nature of the weapons which could be used to bash it, penetrate it, or find holes in it. In addition to that, the standard armor for those who weren't quite as fortunate or as rich to be able to afford that plate armor were wearing mainly helmets and leather brigandines. They were typically made of mainly leather, but they might have had spots of chainmail or small plate on them to add extra protection. In addition to that, there was a need for a secondary weapon. So if you're an archer, you're going to need a weapon to help protect yourself, perhaps later on in the fight, or maybe you're joining the offensive side of it. This was the type of weapon that could be used for that secondary weapon. In addition to that, knights themselves may have been using a different weapon as their primary weapon, but this was the weapon that was always with them, whether they were in combat or not. So this was a weapon which developed as a compromise weapon, a weapon that could be used both to thrust in between those open areas in the armor through chainmail, or it could be used to cut if you're dealing with someone who doesn't quite have that higher level of armor. So if we look at the main features of this sword, it has a blade, which you can see is tapering down from a wide base to a very sharp point. There's no fuller in this blade. It is called a diamond-shaped, typically a flattened diamond shape, and it has this very pronounced ridge running down the center of the blade. It has a curved guard, which slopes down into the blade, and it's a one-handed sword made to be used with one hand with about a medium-sized grip. Not really tight, and just enough room to get the whole hand on that sword. This is an excellent example of that sword. If we look at this sword within the context of the Oakeshott classifications, it matches up tremendously with a Type 18 arming sword. The flattened diamond-shaped grip with the pronounced ridge, the curved guard, and this guard is called a Type 9 guard, has the single-handed grip, and it has a pommel, which is considered to be a Type H pommel. So an excellent example of an Oakeshott Type 18 sword, Type 18 arming sword. So if we now look at the stats of this sword compared to those on the Darksword Armory website, and I must say that these weapons are all made by hand, and I think that's quite obvious that sometimes there's variations between what might be the stat on the website and what actually gets made. And as I go through the stats of this sword versus the ones on the website, you'll see that in fact is the case. The sword itself is advertised from tip to the end of the pommel to be 36.5 inches long. This sword is actually 39.25 inches long. The main difference in the length is in the blade, and the blade is advertised to be 30 inches long. It's actually 32.5 inches long. The grip is 4.5 inches. It's made from wood base wrapped with a very good quality leather. At the same time, the point of balance is just about 3.5 inches. Now, I don't have a tool for doing this really accurately, but when I use my finger, as you can see, it's about 3.5 inches down from the grip. And at the same time, The pommel has a peened end to where the tang comes up through the sword. So it is hammered down and then filed off to fit the shape of the pommel. So the sword is very close to the specs on the website, and as you can see, it is a very attractive looking sword. Let me talk a little bit about the fit and finish and my general impressions. This blade is absolutely wonderful, and I hope this video does it justice. It's a very beautiful looking blade. It's polished to a beautiful effect. It perfectly straight. The stitching down the side, it is just tremendous. This is an unbelievably well-balanced sword. You could probably hold this all day long and never get tired. It's definitely one of the great features of this sword. The guard itself, why this looks very simple. The guard actually has a flattened section on the bottom, a flattened section on the top, and it's actually diamond shaped coming out on both sides into this point. It's a beautifully complex integral grip, but it looks just tremendous, looks very simple, really adds a lot to the sword. You've got these nice little weapons at the end too. Could definitely be used for gouging or poking your opponent if they're close. The pommel of the sword is perhaps one area where there could have been a little bit more attention. It's not very evenly polished. There are definite spots which are smoother and or brighter than the others. There are actually a few spots where it was ground down and you could feel some roughness. The concave or indentations in the pommel are not 100% round. Now, for me, I think it adds to the character of the sword, so I like it quite a bit. But, you know, for those who are looking for perfection, those are about the only things I could say that aren't perfect about the sword. The actual grip itself, as I mentioned, is leather. It is stitched on the side. The grip is a little bit different than what was advertised on the website. They do have two ridges that go around the grip, both top and bottom. Neither one of them are on this sword. Those ridges actually make the grip look a little bit more expensive, add to the maybe the aesthetic of the sword. But I actually like this quite a bit. It makes it look more like a everyday, everyman's sword, as opposed to perhaps something which was made for a little bit more expensive tastes. So another comment is on the scabbard. This is the upgraded scabbard. So not the basic scabbard. It is an integrated scabbard and belt. The belt is quite different than many of the things you see. No buckle on this belt. Darksword Armory is kind enough to include instructions on how to wear the belt, which is a nice touch. Not necessarily needed really, but it is really adds to the look of the sword when it's sitting in the scabbard and hung up on the wall. Very, very nice. I'd also like to say that from your impression, the first time you pick up this sword, you never really want to put it down. And that's because the look of it, looking down the blade, the feel of it in your hand, it's just like it's meant to be there. This would definitely be a weapon that I think people would be pleased to own and have in their collection. From a perspective of, overall summarizing this sword, the workmanship on this blade is tremendous. It's a great looking sword. There are no blemishes on the blade. There are no imperfections. All the fit and finish of the trim is definitely above average. The scabbard and the integrated belt is an above average piece as well. And I think this is just a tremendous example of Oakshot 18 blade, and I think a tremendous example of an arming sword. One that if you're a collector, you'd like to have in your collection to display. And once again, this is a totally functional sword. So if you're looking to use this for cutting and or thrusting, you wouldn't be disappointed with this as well. So overall, definitely a sword well worth the money. One that you would be proud to have in your collection, and a great example of an authentic arming sword, Oakshot version 18. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed this review.